it's Charlie from Charlie Reads and Reviews, and I'm here to do a video about books that are short, really good, really interesting, and they can get you out of a reading slump. So, last year, 2021, I got to about 35 books by the end of March, but at the end of the year, I only read 39 books. And that's because I think I hit a bit of burnout from all that reading I was doing between Jan and March, but also there was a lot of things happening in my personal life that impacted um, just a lot of my mental state, and I just was not in the space to read books. But a part of me wishes I had been maybe a little bit more deliberate about what books I did read, and I think that might have helped get me out of my reading slump. And so this year, certainly, I've read a lot of really short books, and when I say short, I think they're under 250 pages. And I wanted to share, let me just make sure that they're all under 250. Yeah, they are. And I wanted to share them with you because I think they're really enjoyable books, and maybe if you're in a reading slump, this might spark some interest. All right. So the first book I want to talk about is So Long a Letter by Mariam Abba. This is an African classic. It's actually just a classic, but it is a classic that hails from Africa and Senegal, to be exact. Written in, I think, or published in 1979. This book is, in essence, as its title insinuates, a long letter, which goes over about 95 pages, where the main character, Rama Tulai, has just lost her husband to a stroke or a heart attack, and is writing to her very good friend Aisatu, I think that's how you pronounce her name, and about her loss. And then as she's, I guess, finding the freedom, she finds herself writing more and more about the things that she's been bottling up over time. So it's reflections on just their friendship, around how both of their marriages went, other marriages in their circle of friends and community. And it touches on a whole lot of things around just the side effects or downsides of a patriarchal society, around things like polygamy, the inability to have children, just also the discrepancies between responsibilities over children. In the background, there's also the independence that Senegal is going through. There's also touches a little bit on colonization and the impact on Senegal and its culture. And it also talks a little bit about mental wellness, but overall, what it touches on is a lot of issues that to this day women face when it comes to marriage in particular, in a patriarchal society, and relationships in general, both with their partners, with their in-laws, with their friends, and society as a whole. Thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a 5-star read for me, or 5 halo read for me. But it is also quite a short book. It took me, I would say, the first 4 pages, I did struggle to get through them. I'm not sure why, but I won't lie, after page 4, I devoured that book. I'm not a very fast reader anymore, just mainly because I get easily distracted, but I finished that in about a day. And so if you're a fast reader, you could finish it in a few hours. If you're as slow as me, a day or maybe a day and a half. And if you're slower than that, maybe over a weekend. But I think it's an enjoyable book that is, the writing style is quite easy to follow, and it flows really nicely because it is so long a letter. Then the next book I just recently finished, as you can see, really thoroughly enjoyed it, was Small Country by Gaël Faye. This was translated from French. Gaël Faye is presently, I think, a French national who was born and raised in Burundi until the genocide in Rwanda and the not independence, but the coup and civil war in Burundi, also around about the same time, between 93 and 94. And in this story, it is a historical fiction that reads like it's a memoir. It is from the point of view of Gabrielle, or Gabby, who is a biracial kid who's about 10, turns 11 just before the civil war begins in Burundi, who has been raised in an expatriate lifestyle in Burundi. His mom is Rwandese, a Rwandan refugee living in Burundi, and his dad is a Frenchman doing some business there. And between the two of them, they've raised these two children in Burundi. And so it's a enjoyable read from the perspective of seeing what life was like as an expat for young kids growing up. Some of them biracial, but all of them very privileged in I think it's Bujumbura, the capital. Yeah, Bujumbura, the capital of Burundi. And also some of the other things that they get to explore. It touches a little bit on a visit in Rwanda and the DRC. And then it does touch on the genocide and the impact that it's had on, in particular, Gabrielle's mother, as well as just the impact of the war in general on Burundi and even in their safe community, the impact that it's had, as well as reflecting on the most marginalized communities that are impacted the most by this. It does touch on some pretty gruesome and horrific experiences if you just think about war in general, but also the genocide in Rwanda in 1994, and a little bit of the genocide in 1963-64. But because it is written from the perspective of a child, it is not gratuitous in terms of the description of the violence. Really, really enjoyed it. It was a five halo read again for me. This one's about 183 pages. And the font is a little small, but not too small. But it also is a book that flows right from the first page, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Okay, then I'm going to go to something a little bit more light, talking about some serious stuff, but in a very light way, and that's Convenience Store Woman by Suyaka Murata. This is such a quirky, dry type of tone book about this convenience store woman, Keiko, who is living a very unconventional life in that she thoroughly enjoys her role of being a convenience store woman. She's in her late 30s and is finding that there's been a lot of pressure being put on her from if you live in a patriarchal society, for her to do what's right, and that is to get married and have children. And so it's an interesting look at that, and it really highlights just some of the, I guess maybe the underlying insidiousness of a patriarchal as well as capitalistic society that forces people to conform for no other reason other than because that's what we all do. Thoroughly enjoyed this. Really, really quick to read. Fonts are, I wouldn't say quite large, but they aren't small, and they're not medium. So I'd say they're large, and it's only 163 pages. Thoroughly enjoyed this. I think I also gave it 5 halos when I read it in 2020, or maybe even 4.5, but I really, really enjoyed it. Cool. Then the next book that I read, this one I listened to, which is kind of similar to Convenience Store Woman, and that's Kim Ji-young, 1982. I say the next book that I read, next book that I'm suggesting. And Kim Ji-young, born 1982 by Cho Namju. I'll put a picture somewhere here for that. So this one is also in a similar fashion, written in a dry, quirky style of sense, but this one is based in Korea. Convenience Store Woman is based in Japan. And in this one, whilst it does reflect on patriarchal societies from a different perspective, and that the impact that it has on married women and mothers, and we follow and girl children as a whole, and we follow Kim Ji-young's life from when she was born in 1982 all the way up until modern times, when she has just given birth to her second child, is currently experiencing postpartum depression when she finds out that a good friend of hers has passed away from her second child. And she finds herself finding her voice in a way that her husband thinks that she's lost her mind because she's actually speaking up for herself. And then through this experience, we then get to see what her grandparents or grandmother's experiences were, what her mother's experience was from a patriarchal one. And whilst we see the improvements that have been made over time, one of the things that we become very, very quickly aware of is about the how much more still needs to be done. And it's reflected not only in Kim Ji-young's life, but also in her sister's experiences, her colleagues at work, random strangers in the streets, but also other girl children she goes to school with or college with throughout her life. Really enjoyed it. I gave 4.5 halos, and even though I listened to it, I definitely am going to get a physical version of it. So I'm not sure how many pages it is. I think it's quite short, but it certainly was only a 3-hour audio book, so it's definitely a very short read. Oh, cool. So now we go to another African classic, and that's Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. This is a book that I actually have never read the physical version of. I've listened to it on Audible twice. Really, really enjoy it. This one is actually just over 200 pages. It's 209, but I count it as a short read because it really is, at least from the audio book experience, a very quick listen for myself. I think I find myself finishing it in one day for sure, in just a few hours. So Things Fall Apart, I'm sure you've heard a lot about it, but in essence, we follow the life of, I think his name is Okonkwo, who is this brave warrior in this Igbo village pre-colonization, or rather at the precipice of when Europeans are about to interact with the communities that will form Nigeria at some point. And as this is happening, we get to see a man who is basically suffering from toxic masculinity. He believes that his father, who is a relatively soft man, to be too effeminate, and he chooses to be the complete opposite of him. What that does for him is that he becomes this really fierce and famous warrior, which then bestows him with a lot of land and resources and wives and children. But obviously on the other extreme side, he becomes a really horrible husband, father, with the exception of one of his wives and daughter, a horrible person in general, and ends up committing a crime against humanity that sets him on a very interesting path. There are lots of things that I tend to explore in this book, even on the second read. Things that make me think about what life was like pre-colonization, what life potentially could have looked like without intervention of colonization. And I think this is such a brilliantly written book, very easy to follow, great narrative, and I mean, this is why it's a classic. This is considered to be the first in the trilogy known as the African trilogy, but I'm yet to have read the other two. And so that's the reason I'm only recommending this one. Not saying that you shouldn't check out the full trilogy. I still plan on it. In fact, I have one of them on my shelf. I need to find the third one, and then I'll complete the trilogy. But yeah, definitely a book I thoroughly enjoy rereading and recommend. Then this one, oh man, this one I have read it also twice. And I plan on reading it again. As you can see, thoroughly enjoyed it, tapped it quite a bit. And that is My Sister, the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. This is a thriller, but it's not written, and look, I'm not really a thriller reader, but it's not written in a way that seems like, oh, what's going to happen? It's so horrible. I mean, there are aspects of that, like, oh no, what's going to happen? But it's written in a very quirky, dry, funny way, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. So as you can guess, it's about a character whose sister is a serial killer. So Korede is the older sister, and her younger sister, I'm trying to remember younger sister's name, Ayola, is a serial killer. Ayola is very conventionally beautiful in terms of how at least Nigerian society deems to be conventionally beautiful in terms of her body shape and figure, her personality, her skin coloring. And Korede is considered not to be, although she cooks and cleans and does all the things that apparently make you a good wife, right, in some societies. And so there is this relationship between these sisters where they are attached to each other because of an incident that happened when they're in their youth, that potentially precipitated, or not precipitated, but uh, sparked. There's another word I'm looking for, but I can't find it. But in essence, sparked or triggered. Yeah, triggered is probably triggered. Why Ayola has become a serial killer. It's really funny. It's really well written. I finished this book in one reading, in one day, and I'm not a fast reader, but that's how much I thoroughly enjoyed it. I've written notes in it. It's just a well written book that is, even though it's short, it is only, okay, this one's over 200 as well, but it's like 223 pages. That it packs a punch in terms of the things that it covers, such as just patriarchy, toxic masculinity, domestic violence, child abuse, sexual abuse. And then also asked a lot of questions about, society standards of what beauty means, of what success means, around marriage, so many topics. And in the background, you also then get to see what would it be like to live in Lagos in Nigeria, where this book is set. Thoroughly enjoyed both reads of this, and it always gets a 5 halo from me. Cool. And now for a little bit of a change. I haven't read this book in a very long time, but it's a quick read that I really enjoyed. And Lesego Hlabi is just a brilliant comedian here in South Africa. So Lesego Hlabi's alternative persona is Coconut Kells, and this is Coconut Kells' guide to surviving this shithole. If you recall, in 2016, which I think is when this book was published or maybe posted, Donald Trump, the former president of the United States of America, referred to African countries as shitholes, and so Coconut Kells was giving us a guide on how to survive one of those shitholes, South Africa. It's a brilliant collection of essays where, using sarcasm, she basically pokes holes into a lot of theories out there, perpetuated by a lot of people, in particular Caucasians, around what it means to be black, in particular what it means to be black South African. And it is a brilliant read that everybody should read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. There are no tabs because when I read this, it was a time in my life when I wasn't tabbing or annotating books. Otherwise, for sure, this one would have tabs. So I'm just going to quickly read a bit of the blurb at the back for you. Coconut Kells is a young Caucasian woman trapped in a black woman's body. Kells lives and tries to never leave Sandton and is a staunch member of the DA. It's absolutely hilarious. Everybody will enjoy it. And, like if you're going to be like, oh, I feel like it's going to be racist, or I feel like it's going to be poking fun at white people. I mean, it is, but it's poking fun at some of the ridiculous racist notions that are held about black people in a funny way. Also, this one's how many pages? It's 174 pages, and it's hilarious. If you enjoyed Born Free by Trevor Noah, you will enjoy Coconut Kells' Guide. And then I thought I'd switch it up a little bit. I'm not really a poetry reader, but Soft Magic by Upile Chisala was one that I really enjoyed. I mean, look at this, right? It's really short poems. Not all of them are that short, but some of them are just like one sentence. And I thoroughly enjoyed her style. I had never read Rupi Kaur before. I'd read Upile Chisala's, and I will admit that they seem quite similar. But after having read this one and then read Rupi Kaur, I'm not really a huge fan of Rupi's work, but I still thoroughly enjoy Upile's, and I'm not sure why that is. Maybe it's because I'm African and it speaks more to me. But I just think you must be so talented to be able to write one sentence or a couple of phrases that really hits the soul or heart of some important issues that reflect on some of the things that you're maybe running away from or that you don't know how to put into words. It's also only 125 pages. It's a really, really short read. A book that I would suggest, like if you're in a slump, feeling emotional, feeling sad about something, this is something that you could totally check out and would lift you up. All right, and then my last two books are coming up, and that is The Zulus of New York by Da. This one I think is also over 200, just over 200. It's 206 pages. I've never read anything by Da, but he is a very popular South African author. And when this came out, I saw somebody post a review on Facebook about it, and I happened to be traveling to Cape Town. And whenever I get to the airport, I go past the bookstore because I had problems. And I saw it there on sale, and I bought it. And I actually lost the original one. I don't know if I lent it to somebody, but I cannot find it. And so this copy is actually a second one that I found on sale at a bookstore. But when I first initially bought it back in 2018, I finished this book in one day. It was so good. So in this story, it's a historical fiction, and it's about the Zulus of New York, as the title says. We follow, what is his name? MP. But MP's full name, try find his full name. Yeah, I read this last in 2018, but I'm going to be rereading it this year because one of my book clubs, it's one of the books that we're reading this year. I'm trying to find MP's full name. Anyway, so MP is a Zulu man who ends up committing a crime. Oh, there his name is. Mpie Zintombi. So Mpie Zintombi was part of King Setshwayo's army, imperial army. He was one of their top warriors. He had lived a pretty good life. The British they were interacting quite a bit with the British, so they were it was during those battles at that time of history, where in the part of South Africa that is now known as KwaZulu-Natal, and I guess then was just called Zululand, or not sure what they actually called it back then. I'm sure there's a name in here, but I cannot remember. But it also is linked to around about the time of the Anglo-Zulu Wars, around about that time, when he commits a crime against his king, and he doesn't wait to find out what's going to happen to him because he knows he'll just be killed. He knows that's the punishment. And he ends up getting onto a boat that is supposed to take him to England, and somehow he ends up in New York. And then it just is a beautifully written book where you learn about, I learned a lot about culturally about the isiZulu pre-colonization, which is really interesting for me living in South Africa, interacting with a lot of people who are Zulu, but hearing things that I've never really heard before, so that was really cool. And then also I didn't realize that there were these, we knew about these zoos in the UK and, well, let me just say Europe and in the US, but this is the first time I've really read anything that really goes into that. So in the Zulus of New York, in essence, there's like entertainment in these zoos where white Americans come and watch these black people in cages entertain them. It's pretty horrific stuff, but it's written in a way that you can engage with the content without being too put off to finish it. Really quick read, really enjoyed it, learned a lot about history, about some of the horrific aspects of it, but also some interesting things that, about survival and how Africans have been able to survive a lot. And then the final book is one of my favorite books to reread. I think I read this book, I'm sorry, you can even see how damaged it is. I think I've read this book like 4 times. I definitely want to read it again this year. And that's The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. Apologies if I've totally mispronounced that name. This is a classic that I actually had never read until 2015 when I was gifted this by my then boyfriend. We had just started dating, and he, when you're getting to know somebody, I was like, oh, I like reading books, and we were talking about the books that we like, and he mentioned The Little Prince, and I was like, I've never read it, and he bought it for me for my Christmas gift. trying to think. I think this is actually the only Christmas gift that he gave me in hindsight. But and we spent 2 Christmases in our relationship. But it was probably one of my favorite gifts that I've ever gotten, because I was absolutely blown away by the story. So, what is the story about? The story is about a little prince who lives on another planet and decides he wants to go and explore the world, and he ends up on Earth, but he ends up stuck on Earth, and he's trying to figure out how to get back to his home because he misses his love, his Rose, that he used to spend all his time taking care of. And during this journey of him trying to figure out how to get back home, he bumps into a French pilot who is stranded in the desert, who is crash landed and is trying to figure out how to fix his plane so he can get back home. And through the story, we get a lot of beautiful insights into what it means, what home means, what the purpose of life is, and importantly, what love is and where we find it. I love this book so much. And I have tattoos. I know the way I'm dressed, you can't really see them, but I definitely want to get one of these tattoos. I sometimes consider this as one of them. There's another one here. This is one of my favorite pictures from this. Sorry, it's the one where they're drawing a picture of. There's a picture, and when you first look at it as an adult, you see a hat. Oh man, can't find it. Oh, maybe it's right at the beginning, actually, now that I think about it. Oh yeah, it is. This is my favorite one. So when you look at it up here, this is what adults see, that it's a hat. But if you're a child, you see that it's actually a python that has devoured an elephant. And I love that because it just makes you think about like how much we lose as adults in terms of like our creativity, but also our connection to ourselves and other aspects of life. This book is quite short. It's translated from French. It's 112 pages, and it's a very quick read, written in a narrative style. Thoroughly enjoyed it. 5 halos. So there you have it. I have mentioned 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, there you have it. 10 books, 10 short books that can help you get out of a reading slump. Happy Friday.